Thanks for joining us for today's TCAS webinar. My name is Roger Moore, and I'll be your host throughout the presentation. I'm currently the Air Transport Program Pilot for the Flight Technical Services team, which is part of Honeywell Aerospace's Marketing and Product Management Services group. This is a reminder that today's presentation contains Honeywell proprietary information and is compiled for training purposes only, and except for training on the recipient's equipment, cannot be reproduced, used, or sold to others without authorization from Honeywell International. Today's agenda will cover an introduction to TCAS, a description of the TCAS display symbols, flight guidance issued for both traffic advisories and resolution advisories, what to do when clear of conflict, some operational notes, which will basically summarize what we talk about. TCAS is used to detect and track intruders in the vicinity of your aircraft. By interrogating the transponders, it analyzes the data to determine range, bearing, and relative altitude of the intruder, provided the transponders are reporting altitude. When the TCAS processor determines a possible collision hazard exists, it will issue visual and audio advisories to the crew for proper vertical avoidance maneuvers. What it cannot do is detect an intruding aircraft if it does not have an operating transponder. ACAS II is the international equivalent of TCAS II. The two terms are used interchangeably, so for this presentation, TCAS II will be the terminology used. The material you see today is current through software change 7.1, which has been mandated in Europe and deals with resolution path reversals for collision avoidance, and we'll discuss that later in the presentation. The traffic advisory display shows the intruding aircraft's relative position and altitude from yours. It also displays a trend arrow if the intruder is climbing or descending in excess of 500 feet per minute. The traffic advisory may be presented on a weather radar display, a nav display, a dedicated TCAS display, or a TAVSI display. The resolution advisory is incorporated into the vertical speed indicator, or primary flight display, and a heads-up display on some aircraft. By lighting red and green areas around the vertical speed indicator, it displays the required rate or limitation of climb or descent to avoid a possible collision. As always, air traffic control procedures and the see and avoid concept remain the primary means of ensuring aircraft separation in the absence of a resolution advisory. However, when an RA is issued, compliance with the RA is required. Pilots must respond immediately by following the RA guidance as indicated, unless doing so would jeopardize the safety of the airplane. Follow the RA even if there's a conflict between the RA and the ATC instructions, and never maneuver in the opposite direction of the RA. It's important to remember that visually acquired traffic may not be the same traffic causing the resolution advisory. Visual perception of an encounter with the wrong traffic could be very misleading, especially at night. Pilots must also notify ATC as soon as practical of a resolution advisory, including the direction of any deviation from the current ATC instruction or clearance. The TCAS system is compatible but independent from the ATC system. TCAS determines whether a traffic threat exists and supplies visual and oral alerts to the crew using position information displayed on a nav display or a TAVSI, vertical guidance displayed on the vertical speed indicator, and a synthesized voice. TCAS calculates the correct vertical evasive maneuver for your aircraft, plus coordinates maneuvers for two or more other TCAS-equipped aircraft through Mode S transponder communication. So here's how a typical encounter would play out. Two TCAS-equipped aircraft compute the need for a resolution advisory. Using the Mode S transponder, air-to-air data link communication, complementary advisories are issued to each aircraft. In other words, if one is instructed to climb, the other will be instructed to descend. If the crew in each aircraft promptly follows the advisory, the collision threat is avoided. Since the maneuvers are coordinated, the crew must never maneuver contrary to the advisory. TCAS can track as many as 45 aircraft at a time, display up to 30 of them, and coordinate an RA for up to 3 intruders at once. The advisories are always based on the least amount of deviation required from the flight path while performing safe operation. TCAS change 7.1 requires a Mode S transponder plus barrel altitude and radio altitude sources. TCAS will not detect aircraft with transponders inoperative or in standby. TCAS advisories are based on time And we've depicted those time-based boundaries of the caution, warning, and collision areas on this slide. Note the perimeter of the caution area is 20 to 48 seconds from the time the intruder would penetrate the collision area, while the warning area perimeter is 15 to 35 seconds from the time of collision area penetration. Here's a quick comparison of transponder capability. Mode A has no altitude information, and TCAS cannot determine RAs for Mode A. Mode C relies on both Mode A code plus altitude information, so turning off Mode C simply blanks out the altitude. A Mode S transponder contains a unique, permanently wired address assigned by ICAO. The address is independent of the code assigned by ATC and is used in communications with other Mode S transponders to coordinate and resolve potential conflicts. TCAS can't detect airplanes with inoperative or non-ICAO compliant transponders. TCAS presents 4 different traffic symbols on the display. As a potential intruder moves towards your aircraft, the symbols change shape and color to represent increasing levels of urgency. The symbols are non-threat traffic, proximity intruder traffic, traffic advisory, and resolution advisory. We'll expand on each of these individually as we progress. The symbols can also have an associated altitude tag that shows relative altitude to your aircraft in hundreds of feet. The altitude increases or decreases to indicate whether the intruder is climbing, flying level, or descending. A plus sign and a tag above the symbol means the intruder is above your altitude, and a minus sign and a tag below the symbol means the intruder is below your altitude. A trend arrow is displayed when the intruder's vertical speed is 500 feet per minute or greater. If the intruder is non-altitude reporting, the symbol is shown without an altitude number or trend arrow. The type of symbol selected by the TCAS will be based on the intruder's location and closing speed. If TCAS is unable to locate the azimuth of the other aircraft during a TA or RA, then a no bearing message will be displayed. An open white diamond indicates that an intruder's relative altitude is greater than plus or minus 1,200 feet vertically, or its distance is more than 6 nautical miles. So it's considered non-threat traffic. In this example, the traffic is 1,700 feet below your altitude, climbing at 500 feet per minute or greater. A filled white diamond indicates the intruding traffic has become a proximity intruder. It's within plus or minus 1,200 feet vertically and within 6 nautical miles. However, still at this point, it's not considered a threat. The illustration shows traffic 1,000 feet below your aircraft and climbing. When the symbol changes to a filled yellow circle, it indicates the intruding traffic is now considered to be a potential hazard, and the system will issue a traffic advisory. Depending on the relative altitude, TCAS displays a TA when the time to the closest point of approach is between 20 and 48 seconds. This illustration shows traffic 900 feet below your aircraft climbing at 500 feet per minute or greater. Normally, a TA precedes an RA by 10 to 15 seconds. During that time, the crew should attempt to gain visual contact with the intruder and be prepared to maneuver when a resolution advisory is sounded 10 to 15 seconds later. Never maneuver in response to just a TA. Wait for the resolution advisory before departing your last assigned altitude or clearance. The solid red square indicates the intruding aircraft is projected to be a collision threat. The TCAS system has calculated the intruder has reached the point where a resolution advisory is necessary. The time to the closest point of approach with the intruder is now between 15 and 35 seconds. The intruder is now 600 feet below your altitude and still climbing. A synthesized voice will now announce a vertical maneuver command such as climb, climb. The pilot must promptly but smoothly initiate the required maneuver within 5 seconds using pitch cues or the vertical speed indicator as appropriate. The presence of a TA or RA target beyond the selected range on the display will show up as half of the traffic symbol at the edge of the display, as shown in the illustration. You at least get the bearing to the intruder. You can expand the range out to a higher mileage to see the actual position of the intruding aircraft. So before we discuss the how-tos of resolution advisory maneuvers, we need to remind you there are two types of RAs. Corrective, which means there's some type of physical maneuvering required of the pilot in order to avoid a potential collision. And preventive, which means if the pilot just continues in his present state, the conflict can be avoided. For example, monitor vertical speed or maintain vertical speed, maintain. When the conflict is resolved, an oral clear of conflict will be heard, and the pilot is expected to return to his previous altitude and report to ATC. The resolution advisory is normally incorporated into the vertical speed indicator, but in some cases the primary flight display is used. On the vertical speed indicator, the fly to and fly away from commands are displayed by lighting green and red light bands around the dial. The light bands will coincide with the vertical rate required to comply with the resolution advisory. The aircraft should be maneuvered promptly but smoothly in response to an RA and always fly to the green. Some resolution advisors require a maneuver by the crew while some warn against maneuvering. In other words, some RAs are corrective, some are preventive, as previously discussed. Response time by the crew should be within 5 seconds, and G-forces required should be around plus or minus 0.25 Gs. That's not a lot, but it's positive enough to feel like the initiation of an en route climb or descent. Because of the G-force requirement, the RA maneuver should be hand-flown. The autopilot will not respond fast enough. And finally, if the RA maneuver command is reversed for some reason, per the 7.1 software change, the pilot must be able to respond to the reversal within 2.5 seconds. As an interesting side note, Airbus has integrated TCAS sensing and arming capabilities into the A350 autoflight system, so the autopilot will actually be able to fly the required RA maneuver. The intruder aircraft is at 12 o'clock, 200 feet below your altitude and flying level. TCAS issues a climb resolution advisory. The crew should promptly but smoothly establish at least a 1,500 foot per minute rate of climb to comply with the RA command of 1,500 to 2,000 feet per minute, which is the green band in the illustration. When the RA is displayed on a primary flight display, the TCAS pitch command appears as a green box. Red goalposts, for lack of a better term, indicate the no-fly zones. Fly the aircraft symbol into the green box where it will turn green. If the symbol is flown into the no-fly areas, it will turn red. If the RA is presented on a HUD, the display is identical to the primary flight display. The pilot will need to maneuver the flight path vector symbol into the fly to zone for collision avoidance. If you happen to have a TAVSI, it looks like this. The light band works the same as on a conventional vertical speed indicator. However, as you can see, the traffic symbols are also displayed directly on the face of the instrument as well. More examples. You've just accomplished the climb resolution advisory. The intruder is still at 12 o'clock and flying level below your aircraft. When separation is ensured, you'll hear level off, level off. The pilot should level the aircraft and comply with the new light band commands as shown in the illustration. Prior to change 7.1, this command was adjust vertical speed, adjust. However, EASA and the rest of the European community felt that command left the door open for misinterpretation, so they mandated the change to level off, level off. In this example, one intruder is at 12 o'clock, 500 feet above, and another intruder is at 12 o'clock and 500 feet below. The resolution advisor will be maintain vertical speed, maintain. The pilot should remain in level flight. The TCAS has computed the vertical speed limits for climb and descent to prevent a collision and presented them as a green band on the vertical speed indicator. In this example, the intruder is at 12 o'clock, 500 feet below your altitude. The resolution advisory is monitor vertical speed. The pilot should maintain level flight. Do not descend. The TCAS will present a red light band on the vertical speed indicator as a do not fly to area. Here the intruder is at 12 o'clock, 400 feet above your altitude and flying level. You're already establishing a climb at 2,000 feet per minute. The resolution advisor will be maintain vertical speed, crossing maintain. The pilot should maintain his current climb rate as commanded by the green light band on the vertical speed indicator to ensure climbing above the intruder. Here are the intruders at 12 o'clock, 200 feet above your altitude and flying level. The resolution advisory is descend, descend. The pilot should promptly but smoothly establish a 1,500 foot per minute rate of descent in order to keep the airplane in the green band on the vertical speed indicator. Here the intruder is ahead and above your altitude and has suddenly changed from level flight to a rapid descent after the TCAS has already issued your aircraft a descend RA. TCAS is now reversing that descend RA to a climb. The pilot is expected to initiate the change from a descent to a climb maneuver within 2.5 seconds using up to 0.35 Gs. TCAS will put a green band on the vertical speed indicator for the desired climb rate as illustrated, and the pilot needs to fly the aircraft to that green band to ensure traffic separation. The intruder is no longer a threat as it has passed behind and below your aircraft. The oral alert is clear of conflict, and the light band disappears from the vertical speed indicator. The pilot should now return to his previous ATC clearance. To recover, if in level flight, return to the previously assigned altitude unless otherwise directed by ATC. If climbing or descending, resume the planned climb or descent or as instructed by ATC, and resume the applicable ATC clearance unless otherwise directed. This slide contains some information about the European mandate for TCAS change 7.1. The European Union approved their final rule requiring ACAS II change 7.1 for turbine-powered aircraft over 12,500 pounds are certificated for more than 19 passengers in March of 2012. The retrofit date for that rule is December 1st of this year. The Hong Kong Civil Aviation Department passed a similar rule, same weight but fewer passengers, for January 2014 with a retrofit compliance date of January 2017. So Honeywell solutions for 7.1 are as listed on the slide. The TPA 81A is replaced with the TPA 100B. TPA 100A will require a software upgrade and conversion to a no part number, which will make it TPA 100B, and the TPA 100B is already compliant by design. Change Proposal 112E listed a series of TCAS-related issues that were ultimately responsible for the mandate, but the last one on the list here was really the catalyst as it resulted in a collision when one of the aircraft did not respond correctly to the RA. And then Change Proposal 115 is a proposal that changes the adjust vertical speed adjust to level off, level off. At any rate, here's a brief description of the changes that were implemented. On the right of the slide, with or without TCAS, the aircraft is given a descent. With TCAS installed, the aircraft would have received a climb resolution advisory, but in this case, the crew ignored it. On the left of the slide, with TCAS, a descent RA is issued. 7.1 will sense the other aircraft ignoring his TCAS and issue a reversal to a climb resolution advisory. Previous versions would not have issued a reversal. Earlier versions of TCAS issued an adjust vertical speed adjust resolution advisory and a range of options on the vertical speed indicator that EASA felt would be misleading. The best solution in the mandate is to level the aircraft to avoid any misinterpretation. These are the audio messages that the TCAS system will announce over the aircraft audio system. These are listed in the pilot guide. Of note in this first group, these are all the non-resolution advisory. And take note that the traffic advisory at the bottom there is only spoken once when a second traffic advisory appears. The rest of these are resolution advisories, too many for one slide, so I broke them into two slides. The first group here are probably the most commonly heard. And then these are the rest of the resolution advisories. Note, I pointed out which two there are 7.1 changes for vertical speed restricted, including climbing and descending, level off, and any weakening or softening of a resolution advisory will also produce a level off, level off. And then these are the resolution advisories for changes and reversals. These are the ones that require a 2.5-second response time and up to 0.35 Gs on the part of the pilot. So here's some operational notes of interest that will pretty much summarize a lot of what we just talked about. In the event of a resolution advisory, pilots will deviate from their last ATC clearance to the extent necessary to comply with the RA. Follow the commanded deviations and return to the original clearance when clear of conflict is issued. Always remember to advise ATC of the resolution advisory and any deviations you make, plus any required reports should be completed after landing, such as NASA reports and company reports. Once again, the system can't detect intruders that don't have transponders, or transponders that are off, standby, in-op, or have invalid baro or radio altimeter information. For normal operations, run TCAS in the TARA mode. However, on the ground, set the unit to standby because it could interfere with the TAWS capability for airborne aircraft. If you happen to be operating engine out, set the system to TA only. An engine out aircraft may not have the performance capability to accomplish the RA avoidance maneuvers. Stall margins could be compromised with excessive bank angles, abnormal configurations, low speeds, decreased buffet margins, or during a TCAS to TCAS resolution advisory sense reversal. TCAS exists to enhance situational awareness and provide alerts for the crew the same way EGPWS and the wind shear system alerts pilots of potential threats. However, it's important to note that wind shear alerts and EGPWS alerts in that order take priority over TCAS. When a TCAS resolution advisory is inhibited by either of the other two systems, only a traffic advisory is issued and oral commands are temporarily inhibited. And just in case you've forgotten, TCAS can't detect an intruder without a transponder. In an effort to keep airplanes out of the rocks, the increased descent resolution advisories are inhibited below 1,450 feet above ground during a descent and 1,650 feet above ground in the climb. All resolution advisories are inhibited below 900 feet in the descent and 1,100 feet in the climb, and all TCAS audio warnings are inhibited below 400 feet radio altitude on approach and up to 600 feet radio altitude on departure. Remember, disengage the autopilot and auto throttle for resolution advisory maneuvers. Aircraft-specific operating limitations are hard-coded in the TCAS processor, so a climb or increased climb RA is inhibited when the RA maneuver can't be completed safely due to lack of performance capability. Resolution advisories are based on the expectation that the crew will comply within 5 seconds. Any modification issued, including an increase or reversal to an RA, requires 2.5-second reaction time. So that's all the information we have for you today on TCAS. If there are other subjects that you'd like to pursue about your aircraft or other safety products that Honeywell makes, you can get there via the Pilot Gateway. The website is pilots.honeywell.com. There's a sign-in page that will invite you to register, get a username and password. It will take you to this page where you select your aircraft manufacturer, or if you care to look at this or previous webinars, select other resources. Take you to a page that says Documents and Resources. You can scroll down and see Online Learning. Open that link and it will take you to a list of this and previous webinars and other subject matter about your aircraft or particular things in the safety products that you might want to look at. Again, thanks for being here. It was our pleasure. Hope you enjoyed it.